Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you this morning. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but sometimes when I am looking at the news, I often read the news on my phone in a little app, or sometimes I'll switch on the news and see it on the TV. But I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I find it all a bit jarring. The kinds of things that sit side by side in the news. You know, just this morning, I looked on the news, and one of the top headlines was that 30 people have been killed in a bombing in a wedding in Turkey. Right next to that, Mo Farah gets the double-double. Hey! These things sitting side by side, it's quite difficult. It's quite hard to sort of be interested and engaged in both at once because they occupy very different parts of our brain. Just to carry on, we've got the Labour leadership tussles with Sadiq Khan jumping in and saying that Jeremy Corbyn really should be out. We've got the ongoing questions about what Brexit is going to mean and when we're going to go out and how we're going to go out and what that means for business and commerce and all different kinds of things. We've got people celebrating their A-level results because a lot of people are very happy with their A-level results. They can go to the universities they want. They can get the jobs they want. We've got a lot of people who are commiserating because they're not very happy with their A-level results because they didn't get the grades they wanted. We've got the future arriving in our midst. I don't know if anyone else saw the story, but Volvo are teaming up with Uber, and in not very long, they're trialing it in the States. There are going to be the first self-driving cars. The future has arrived. And yet there's all sorts of horrible things going on. I don't always know what mode my brain is meant to be in when I'm looking at the news. Because some of it is exciting, some of it is scary, some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it gives me hope, some of it makes me fear. It's hard to know where to sit and what to do. It can jar and pull you in different directions. Some of it seems huge and some of it actually seems quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But that's true, not just of the news and of what we see going on in the world, but our own lives. Because every day we have these different categories playing up against each other in our lives. These big things that we think we really should be dwelling on, and these other things which actually on the surface seem insignificant, but actually take a lot of our thought life anyway. Over the last few days, I've been trying to capture some of my thoughts and think, what is it actually that I think about? What is it that goes on in here? I'm not going to share all of them, but here are some things that I've thought about. Yes, I've thought about things that are going on in the news. I've thought about the things that are going on in the world, what that implications that has for all of us. Then I look at the Olympics, and I have to ask the question, am I heartless? Am I soulless? Because I need to confess, I've not really been that bothered this time around. At the 9 o'clock service, I got a bit of a boo when I said that. So I don't know. It hasn't gripped me. It has in previous years, but I don't know. So on the one hand, I've been thinking a bit about the Olympics and why I don't care. On the other hand, I've been thinking, am I just a horrible person? Then I've been thinking about my future. I've been thinking about where God's leading me. I spend quite a bit of time thinking about what's in the future, what's coming next. Not because I can plan everything out, but because I'm excited about things. What's going to happen in my life? What's going to happen in my calling? What's God going to do next? And it's exciting. And then I think, hang on, is that really significant when there's so many things going on in the world and so much uncertainty about the future of the world? Surely I should care more about that than just my life. Then, over the last sort of couple of weeks, I've been thinking quite a bit about how I deal with certain things, how I deal with things like pressure and stress, how I deal with criticism, how I deal with failure. I've been thinking about my own mental health and how resilient I am and how I can deal with that, what sort of ways I can learn to cope with things as they come up. I've been wrestling a little bit with that. That feels like quite a significant thing to try and get my head around. But then on the other hand, then I flick onto my phone and I see that my niece, who's 4 months old, has learnt to roll over, and it's really cute. And I have these different things pulling me in different directions. I'm thinking about I've been on holiday this week, and I've been thinking, how can I make the most of that holiday? What can we do that will be the most fun and the most relaxing? And then I think about my emails when I come back home, and I think about the fact that I'm going to have quite a lot to do, and I think about my friends and my family and my colleagues, and all of these things are pulling in different directions, and I don't always know how to hold on to them. Sometimes I feel guilty for thinking about the small things that only really affect me when there are so many big things going on in the world. Sometimes I don't have the time to think about the big things going on in the world or even the big things going on in my life because I've got something that needs to be done today. It might be quite small, it might be quite insignificant, but it's the only thing I'm thinking about. How do we hold on to all of those things together? This isn't just a chance for me to wax lyrical about the struggles of my internal monologue, don't worry. I have a faith question to ask, which is, all of these different things, these different categories that our mind seems to occupy day by day, we're quite good at holding these things side by side in our brain and actually latching onto the right one at the right time. But do we actually think that God is involved and cares about all of them? Or do we just think he's only interested in this subsection? If in our brains and in the news we see big and little side by side, we see good and bad side by side, we see hope and fear side by side, we see our successes and our failures side by side, do we think that God only cares about half of those and not the rest? Do we think that God only really cares about our successes, and when we fail we need to get ourselves out of the ditch? Or are we the opposite? Do we think that our successes are because of our own ability, our own capacity, and then when we fail, we run to God for help? Do we think that God is only involved in the good and beautiful things going on in the world, and he doesn't have any time for the mess, we need to fix it? Or are we the other way around? We never think about God when the going is good, but when things are tough, we look to him and we say, God, we need you to sort all of this out. Which parts of our life, which parts of our thinking do we exclude God from? And do we only think he's interested in the big and not in the little, the seemingly insignificant of our own lives? I want to explore that together today because it's my heartfelt belief that God is overall and he is in all, the big and the small, the exciting and the scary. There's no part of what we might be thinking about that God doesn't want to be involved. There's nothing that we should feel guilty about thinking about because God cares about it too. I want to explore that by looking at a part of the Bible that we maybe don't often look at. It's the first 17 verses of Matthew's Gospel. If you don't have a Bible with you and you want to follow along, I'd strongly recommend it. If you put your hand up and the stewards will be able to bring you a Bible. There's a couple down around, so if you could bring some, that would be fantastic. So if you keep your hands raised, then they'll be able to see you. This is, on the face of it, looks like a list of names. I'll level with you. In the first service, I managed to get through all of the list of names, except I stumbled on one, which was David, which is my own name, so I feel a bit embarrassed about that. But it's a long list of names. It's a family tree. It's a genealogy. It's a lineage of Jesus. This is how Matthew starts his gospel. I've often wondered and asked the question, why? But I want to explore this list of names together, because it was quite normal for a Jewish writer at the time to start by setting out who this person was that they were talking about. If they were writing a biography, which is sort of what the Gospels are, they would explain some of their lineage. They would say, well, they were descended from this person, which means they're probably going to be like this. They're descended from that person, which means they're involved in this area. There's a sort of a connection between someone's lineage, between their DNA and what kind of person they were going to be. There's this assumption that there'll be a connection between the two. So that's the assumption that Matthew has. And the way he lays out his genealogy, I find really interesting. The things that he includes, I find really fascinating. So let me read, hopefully with no mistakes. I very rarely go for a round of applause when I'm preaching, but who knows, maybe you'll bless me. Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. Yes, got it. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, at the time of the deportation to exile to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. Thank you. So, I want to explore this in two halves. I want to look at the bigness of the Jesus who Matthew promises. This is his promise at the beginning of his gospel. And if we unpack this, the promise he's making is, Jesus is big. Jesus is powerful. Jesus is the fulfillment of everything you've been waiting for. Why? Well, he starts with three claims. An account of the genealogy of Jesus. The Messiah, claim 1. The son of David, claim 2. The son of Abraham, claim 3. And then he goes on to back them up. Because we start with this claim that he's the Messiah, the Christ, which means anointed one. We'll come to that in a moment. And the third section of the genealogy is based in the time of the exile. From the time that they go into Babylon, the people of God, to the time when Jesus comes. That was the time when the hope for the Messiah was born. We'll explore that in more detail in a moment. The second claim, he is the son of David. Well, we see that the middle section of the genealogy is saying he had David in his line. Saying that from the time of David to the time of the deportation, there were these 14 generations. The third claim, he's the son of Abraham. All Jewish people were sons of Abraham. All men were sons of Abraham. All Jewish women were daughters of Abraham. They came from the line of Abraham. That's what makes them Jewish. They're part of that big, long, extended family. So we've got these three claims, son of Abraham, son of David, and the Messiah. We've got these three sections of the genealogy that prove Abraham's in the lineage, David's in the lineage, and the time of the exile when the Messiah was hoped for is in the lineage. These are the three claims, and then we come to the end in verse 17, and we read, so from all the generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations, from David to the exile, 14 generations, from the exile to the Messiah, 14 generations. He's making a fairly watertight case. He's saying, these are the three things I say he is, these are the three sections of his lineage that prove that's who he is, and look, here you go, I'll just do my conclusion. These again are the three things he is. That's the claim he's making about Jesus. Why are these three claims so important and so big? Well, to be the son of Abraham was important. Like I said, all Jewish people are sons of Abraham. They're part of that big family. But he's saying more than that. Because in Genesis 12, when God calls Abraham, he says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to the whole world. Later on, he says, I will give you a son. And that son, through that son, the whole world will be blessed. Of course, Abraham does have a son at a rather old age. He has his son, Isaac. Isaac is not a blessing to the whole world. So maybe it's a son of a son. Maybe there's another son of Abraham that's still coming. Of course, Isaac has a son, Jacob, who also doesn't really bless the whole world. Jacob has lots of sons, and they become this family of Israel, named after Israel, which was Jacob's other name. And they go into Egypt, and they also don't seem to bless the world. And there's this promise that there would be this offspring, this seed of Abraham, that would be a blessing to the whole world, that would transform everyone in the world. And it doesn't seem to have happened yet. Matthew's saying, look, I found him. Jesus, he's not just a son of Abraham like all of us are. He is the son of Abraham, the one we've been waiting for, the promised one. That's the first claim he makes. Second claim, he's the son of David. That's an even bolder claim. Not all Jewish people do come from David. Only part of the line makes its way to David. And then everyone else afterwards splits off in all sorts of other directions. So this is a more unique claim. The greatest king in Israel's history stands in Jesus' line. That's impressive. He comes from the line of David. He's part of the house of David. But again, that's not all he's saying. Because there's another promise that was made to David. Let me read it for us. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, God's been talking through a prophet Nathan to David, and he's been making promises about the temple, about things that will happen. And then in verse 11, we read this: Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you, he's talking to David, you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I'll be a father to him, he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod, such as mortals use, with blows inflicted by human beings. But I will not take my steadfast love from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. That's the promise made to David, that he would sit on the throne as the king. But that after him, his descendants would also sit on the throne, that there would always be a king sat on David's throne, that someone in his line would always reign. David had his son, Solomon, who we'll come to in a little bit. But David had his son, Solomon. Solomon had two sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, who made a mess of the whole thing and fought and tussled with one another, and it ended up splitting the whole kingdom in two, and then first the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom ended up being exiled, deported, no longer having their own freedom. Where's the king after the line of David gone? Eventually they come back from exile. There's never a king again. They have local governors, they have prefects, they have local leaders, but they don't ever have a king. So where's this promise that God made? Well, again, it's a promise that hasn't yet been fulfilled. And Matthew's saying, yes, it has now. The king has come. He's not just a son of Abraham, he's the son who's going to bless the world. He's not just a son of David, he's the son who's going to sit on the throne. And finally, he's the Messiah. All through the Old Testament, there are these promises of an anointed one who will come, one who will lead, one who will liberate and free the people of God. They come all the way through the Bible, but at the time when the people most feel their need is the time when they're taken into exile, when they have no freedom, when they're being ruled over by oppressive people. It's at that time that they start to really recognize their need. They think, we need this person to come. We need this ruler to come and free us. That's the time when people like Isaiah were prophesying. And they're promising about this servant who will come, this liberator, this restorer, this person who will take the captives and free them. That's the Messiah that they're waiting for. Then this ruler comes up and thinks, maybe this person's the Messiah, and then they let everyone down. Then this person comes, maybe this person's the Messiah. No, again, they haven't worked out. Matthew is saying, look, I found him. He's not just a son of Abraham, he's the son who's going to bless the world. He's not just a son of David, he's the son who's going to sit on the throne. He's not just a new leader, he is the Messiah, the anointed one sent from God to free all of God's people. That's the claim that Matthew's making. He's the answer to every promise, the fulfillment of every plan, to bring about blessing and renewal to the world, to all people. To sit on the throne, to reign over the kingdom of God, to bring liberation, peace, freedom, prosperity. That's who Jesus is, Matthew's saying. And that's still who Jesus is. He hasn't stopped being those things. He's not stopped being the king. He's not stopped being the liberator. He's not stopped bringing peace and freedom. That's the first thing we need to hold on to when we look at all the things that are happening around us. Whatever situations we face in our own lives, God is bigger. Jesus is bigger. As you've heard Malcolm say from this pulpit a number of times, whatever is going on, God wins. He has the victory. It will one day be complete. One day his victory will be all there is. It will be all we see. Sometimes we lose sight of that. We get so focused on the bigness and scariness of things, and we sometimes focus on the closeness and the intimacy and the companionship of Jesus, which is right. But we forget that he's also king. He's also liberator. He's also the freedom fighter. That's who Jesus always has been, and that's who he is. He has the victory. But that's only one part of our thinking. That's only one part of our brain where we see things that seem too big, and we need to know that God is big enough. That's only one thing that Matthew focuses on. Because there's an odd thing about this genealogy, something that sets it very much apart from others that were written at the time. Because it was very normal for people to set up these big, bold claims about this person that they were going to write a book about. It's very unusual for him to do something else that he does here, because in this lineage, there's 5 if you count Mary, but before Mary, there's 4 women in this genealogy, in this family tree. Now, it wasn't unheard of for a woman to be in a lineage. to be written in a list of names like this. It was unusual, but it wasn't unheard of. But whenever it happened, it was to make a point. Normally, the point being that this person is very impressive. That if there was a particularly dignified or particularly impressive woman in this person's family tree, they would mention that. They would write that down. They would bring more esteem to their central figure by talking about that woman. None of the 4 women in this lineage fit into that category. None of them make sense to put in there unless he's trying to make another point. Who are they? Well, there's Ruth and Rahab and Bathsheba and Tamar. All odd inclusions. Why? Well, some of them are foreign. Ruth. Ruth is from Moab. Ruth is not an Israelite. We remember the story of Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi. It's a lovely, wonderful story. But she's not a particularly impressive woman, not least because Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels. It's the one appealing to Jewish Christians, people who were very rooted in the heritage of their Jewish faith. And so why would he draw attention to the fact that not all of Jesus' ancestors are Jewish? It doesn't make any sense. Rahab is another one, a prostitute from Jericho, from the land of Canaan, where God actually helped the people of Israel to defeat the Canaanites, to get rid of them so that they could have that land. Rahab's a very unimpressive person to put into this list of names. So why include these 2 people who weren't even from Israel in the first place? Well, I can't think of any reason other than that Matthew is reminding his readers that, yes, Jesus is a Jewish person and he comes from deeply Jewish roots, but he didn't just come for the Jewish people. In his own lineage, in his own DNA, in his own being, he carries the blood of the whole world. He carries the internal goings-on of not just Jewish people. He's there for everyone. His roots are from everyone, and he comes for everyone. Matthew isn't willing to let these Jewish readers to privatize their God, to privatize Jesus and say, he only came for us. So he reminds them right at the outset, don't make that mistake. Remember that he may be one of you, but he didn't come just for you. Maybe that's a challenge we need to hear every so often here as well. But it's a strange inclusion in this list. There's also deep sin in this genealogy. It's something that Matthew could have skipped over very easily, very, very quickly. He could have just said, and David's son Solomon, and Solomon's son Rehoboam, and just carried on like that, but he doesn't. He says in verse 6, Jesse was the father of King David, and David was the father of Solomon, by the wife of Uriah. It's interesting. He could just say, David was the father of Solomon. Or he could just say, David's son was Solomon by Bathsheba, a woman. But he doesn't. He makes it very clear. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of another man, by the wife of Uriah. It immediately draws attention to this story in the Old Testament of David's unfaithfulness, of David's adultery, where he took another man's wife. He took Bathsheba, and then he had Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed. It's a horrible story. There's deep sin. Why do it? One of the heroes in the lineage, one of the people that Matthew is trying to say, look, he's from this person. David, he's one of the heroes. Jesus is the son of David. He's impressive. He's the king. Why mention the sin? Why mention this story of failure? Why? Because Jesus came for people like that too. Yes, he's impressive. Yes, he's grand. He's marvelous. He's majestic. But he's also deeply connected with the messiness of our world, with the mistakes we make, with the poor choices we make. It's in his DNA. It's in his blood. He's not going to forget those people. They're part of his family. He wants people like that. Jesus doesn't come as this sort of bubble-wrapped, pristine solution that keeps itself away from the messiness of the world in order to fix it. He gets involved. He associates with that messiness. He lets it become part of him. Never to the point where he becomes sinful. But he identifies with the brokenness so that he can make it whole. Then there's also deep pain in this story. 2 women mentioned, Rahab and Tamar. I already mentioned Rahab. She was a prostitute from Jericho, from Canaan. And what little girl grows up wanting to be a prostitute? There isn't one. We don't know the series of events. We don't know what happened in her life. We don't know, but she got to a place where she would have been in deep pain, where she would have had a life that was far from what she would have wanted. She would have seen people with a life that she did want, but she didn't get to have it. There's pain. And Jesus comes from that as well. What about Tamar, the first woman mentioned in verse 3? Anyone know the story of Tamar? It's a horrible story, told in Genesis chapter 28. Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, one of the 12. Judah had a son. Had a son. In fact, he had 3 sons already. He had his own wife, and he had 3 sons. And the first son married this woman, Tamar. And in that society, her role was to produce him a son. That's what she was good for. That's what she was told you can do. You can produce a son so that the lineage can carry on. Her husband, Judah's son, died before she was able to bear him a son. So she was passed on to the next brother, as was quite customary. Well, you didn't manage to produce a son from this one, so you can get passed on to the next one, who also died before she was able to have a child. So she was passed on to the third son, who she was considerably older than. The third son was very young, and she thought, if I wait until he can help me give him a son, I might be too old by then. But since all I'm good for is to produce a son, I need to find another solution. And so she waits until Judah, her father-in-law now 3 times, is on his way traveling from one place to another place, and she scurries out and she dresses herself up as a prostitute and she sits on the road, and as he comes near, she calls him over and she solicits him. And she has a son from her father-in-law. It's a horrible story. It's a story of messiness and broken relationships, and it upsets me. And I don't like that it's in the Bible. I don't like that story there. I remember reading it one time and thinking, what on earth is going on? That's so disgusting and broken and messy and wrong. And that's the son that ends up being in the line of Jesus. Not the other son that Judah had, that son. See, this is the thing, is that Jesus didn't come just for the pristine, just for the pure, just for those of us who think we've got it all together. None of us do. We're all broken in our own way. We're not all broken in the same way that Judah was or Tamar was, but we're all broken. It actually brings me deep relief to know that Jesus didn't bypass all of that to make his way to me. He entered it. He faced it head on. He said, yes, it is disgusting, but I'm not going to look away from it. That gives me deep encouragement when I feel disgusting. And I know that Jesus isn't going to look away from me. He was willing for Tamar and Bathsheba and Rahab and Ruth and David, the adulterer, and Solomon, the philanderer, and all the liars and awful people in this genealogy. He was willing for them to be part of his family tree. How much more so is he willing for you and I to become part of his family? So we've got these 2 things in this genealogy, side by side. We've got the grandness of this plan that God is fulfilling. Son of Abraham, son of David. He's the Messiah. He's the liberator. He's the freedom fighter. He's all of those things. But we've also got this pain and this hurt and this sin and this brokenness. And at no point does Jesus sacrifice one for the other. At no point does he say, well, today I'm only going to be the liberator and I'm not interested in sinful people. Nor does he ever say, well, okay, I'll come and tend to your needs and I'll be there and I'll be your companion and I'll be alongside you. But at that point, I can no longer deal with all the things that are going on in the world. He wants us to have both at once. He wants to give us both at once. Yes, God has big plans and purposes, but he's always interested in real people. You and me. Yes, Jesus brings hope, new hope, but it's always with us in mind. It's never too grand and big and abstract for us. The peace that the Messiah brings, the peace, the freedom from war, isn't just this ideal. It lands somewhere. It lands on faces like that little boy pulled from the wreckage in Aleppo that I'm sure a lot of us have seen. That's who Jesus brings peace for, as much as he brings it for you and for me. It's not that we have to switch off our engagement with ourselves or with the world in order to relate to Jesus. There's no story in the news, not one that you could find, that Jesus doesn't have an interest in. There's no situation in your life that is too messy for Jesus or too big for Jesus. God ushers in renewal on a grand scale, yes. But it impacts us. It doesn't mean anything unless it affects us when we get up and go to work tomorrow morning. What kind of renewal is that if it only makes sense in this building and not anywhere else? If it only makes sense when we're reading a Bible and not when we're reading the newspaper? If it only makes sense when we're talking to other Christians and praying with them instead of talking to people out in the rest of the world? God is working towards a world with no pain. Yes, he is. But he doesn't forget our pain along the way. He doesn't ignore it. There's nothing vague about this Jesus. This Jesus who is impressive and mighty and majestic is also intimate and close and willing to get messy with us. Jesus doesn't forget his purposes to look out for the little guy, but he never forgets the little guy in order to achieve his purposes either. The gospel is God's purpose for the whole world, and it's his purpose for you and for me. So as I return to that list of things that I've been thinking about, that have been on my mind, which ones do I think are just my issue to deal with? God's not involved. Sure, I'll let him help me as I seek to look after my own health, as I seek to make sure that I'm living in a way that produces wholeness and all those sorts of things. That's good. But I'm not going to worry him with that friend that I'm slightly worried about, because I've got that one sorted. Certainly I'll ask him to give me some wisdom and some advice, and I'll let him speak into my life about the areas of my life, the ministries that I'm leading out on here. Yeah, I definitely need his guidance on that. But when I've got some people coming over for a barbecue in a couple of weeks' time, he doesn't need to be involved in that. Why? Where do we get this thinking from? Why do we have this idea that God only cares about certain aspects of our life or certain aspects of our world? He's interested in this self-driving car. He's also interested in the Olympics, even though I'm really not. He's also interested in wars that are going on, and in famines, and in disease. And we do him a disservice when we either A, think he doesn't care, or B, we choose not to care. God is the God of the big, the universal, the grand. But he's also our friend. He's also our companion. Think about the friends you have. Think about your closest friends. Think about the people you care about most. Do you only want to know when they've had a promotion, or they've been fired, or they've had a child, or they're getting married, or they're getting divorced, or something big, something that's going to impact their life in a big way? Do you only want to know about that? Or sometimes you just want to know what film they saw last week, and whether they liked it, and what book they're reading, or what they're doing at the weekend. True relationships, the relationships that really count, we're interested in the whole of someone. Why do we assume that Jesus cares about us any less, and only cares about the big things, only cares about the things that seem life-changing? The Jesus who I believe in, the Jesus who many of you know, he loves you enough to care about all of it. So don't feel guilty thinking about anything. Invite Jesus in as you do. Ask him what he thinks. Ask him what he wants to say about it. Big and little, good and bad, hope and fear, success and failure. If we're guilty of only thinking that Jesus cares about some of those things and not all of those things, we need to remember that the same Jesus who is the son of David, the king who sits on the throne forever, is also a descendant of an adulterer and a prostitute. We need to remember that the same Jesus who is fulfilling God's promise to bless the whole world also came being born by a frightened teenage girl who was being shut out of her community because everyone thought that she'd had an affair. We need to remember that in God's mind, bigness and messiness are not opposites. He chooses to do one through the other. So there's nothing wrong with having those things sitting side by side in our mind. In fact, even better would be if instead of side by side, we managed to pull them together. We managed to keep hold of both of those things at once. Whatever it is right now that's on your mind, whatever it is that occupies your thoughts, don't try and turn it down so you can focus on God. Instead, invite God to it. Because I can promise you one thing, he cares about it. We're going to sing a song. We bow down and confess. It's a song we've sung many times. We bow down and confess you are Lord in this place. But what I'd encourage you to do, we'll sing this song and then Malcolm will continue to lead us. What I'd encourage you to do, when we sing, we bow down and confess you are Lord in this place, don't just think about this physical place, this building or this community or this village. What place is it in your life or in this world or in your thinking that you need to remind yourself that Jesus is Lord there too? Maybe you need to remind yourself that Jesus is Lord in Syria because it all just feels too hopeless. Maybe you need to remind yourself that Jesus is Lord over your business, over your work, over your grades, those of you who got them or who are getting them this week. Maybe it's something that feels far smaller, something that you feel guilty about asking Jesus about when there's so many other things you could pray for. Maybe it's the social gathering you've got coming up this week that you're a bit nervous about whether it's going to go to plan. Maybe it's the family who are visiting. Maybe it's the loved one who you've not spoken to for a while or who's a little bit ill. On a morning when we celebrate the birth of little Elodie Joy, and when Jackie shares the news that Jill Bakewell, our sister, is nearing the end of her life, does Jesus care only about one of those things and not the other? We can celebrate and we can grieve both at the same time. Where is it for you? What place in your thinking? What place in your being do you need to remind yourself that Jesus is Lord? Just as the bands start to play, take some time to think about that. And then maybe you'd like to kneel with me as we confess that Jesus is Lord over that thing as well.